The village of Kyrenia clung to the edge of the Aegean Sea like a barnacle to a ship's hull. Its whitewashed houses, stacked precariously on the cliffs, seemed to defy gravity, their windows glinting like watchful eyes over the restless waters below. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the cries of gulls, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks was the heartbeat of our lives. I was Cassandra, a priestess of Poseidon, though I often felt more like a prisoner of his temple. My family had served the god of the sea for generations, and I had been chosen from birth to carry on this legacy. The temple loomed over the village, its marble columns weathered by centuries of wind and spray. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of incense, and the statue of Poseidon, his trident raised high, his eyes fixed on some distant horizon, dominated the space. I had always been devout, but lately, my faith had begun to waver. The villagers came to the temple with their offerings and prayers, begging Poseidon for calm seas and bountiful catches. Yet the sea grew more unpredictable by the day. Storms raged without warning, and the fishermen returned with empty nets and haunted eyes. Some whispered that Poseidon was angry, that we had offended him in some way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. Then came the earthquakes. The first tremor struck at dawn, shaking the ground so violently that the temple's columns groaned like living things. I was in the inner sanctum, lighting the morning incense, when the floor buckled beneath me. I stumbled, catching myself on the altar as the statue of Poseidon swayed precariously. The villagers' screams echoed through the streets, mingling with the crash of collapsing buildings. When the shaking subsided, I rushed outside to find the village in ruins. Houses had crumbled into the sea, and the cliffs were scarred with fresh fissures. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of fear. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces pale and their voices trembling as they cried out to Poseidon for mercy. But I noticed something strange. The tremors hadn't come from the land, they had come from beneath the sea. The waves had receded before the quake, leaving the harbor floor exposed, only to come crashing back with unnatural force. It was as if the sea itself were alive, writhing in pain or anger. As I helped the villagers dig through the rubble, I found something that would change everything. Beneath the shattered remains of the temple's outer wall lay an ancient tablet, its surface etched with symbols I had never seen before. The stone was weathered and cracked, but the markings were unmistakably deliberate, a language older than the gods themselves. I showed the tablet to Lycos, the village scholar, a man who scoffed at the gods and believed only in the power of reason. He examined it with a mixture of skepticism and fascination, tracing the symbols with his fingers. "This is no ordinary script," he said, his voice low. "It speaks of a power older than Poseidon, a force that binds the sea and the earth. If I'm reading this correctly, it suggests that Poseidon's trident is more than a symbol of his dominion. It's a key to something far greater." I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it be true? Could Poseidon's power extend beyond the waves, into the very bones of the earth? And if so, what did that mean for us? The villagers were quick to blame the earthquakes on Poseidon's wrath, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The tremors felt wrong. They were too violent, too erratic, as if something, or someone, was tampering with forces they didn't fully understand. That night, as I knelt before the statue of Poseidon, I prayed for guidance. But the god remained silent, his stone eyes staring into the distance as if he too were searching for answers. The next morning, the tremors returned, stronger than before. The ground split open, swallowing homes and lives in an instant. The sea churned violently, its waves crashing against the cliffs with a fury that seemed almost sentient. As I stood on the temple steps, watching the chaos unfold, I made a decision. I would not wait for the gods to save us. I would seek the truth myself, no matter the cost. With the tablet in hand and Lycos at my side, I set out for the underwater palace of Poseidon, guided by the trident-shaped artifact we had found in the temple ruins. The journey would be perilous, but I had no choice. The fate of my village, and perhaps the world, depended on it. Little did I know, the truth would be far stranger and more dangerous than I could have imagined. The sea was a fickle mistress, and she did not welcome intruders. Lycos and I stood on the rocky shore, the trident-shaped artifact clutched tightly in my hands. The waves roared like a living beast, their frothy crests crashing against the cliffs with a fury that made my heart race. The villagers had begged us not to go, their faces pale with fear, but I knew there was no other choice. The earthquakes were growing worse, and the tremors now reached far beyond our village. If we didn't act soon, the entire world might crumble into the sea. "Are you sure about this?" Lycos asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. He adjusted the straps of his leather satchel, which was filled with scrolls, tools, and the ancient tablet we had found in the temple ruins. His skepticism about the gods hadn't wavered, but even he couldn't deny the strange power radiating from the artifact. "No," I admitted, staring at the churning waters. "But we don't have a choice." The artifact had led us here, to a hidden cove where the cliffs formed a natural arch over the water. According to the tablet, this was the entrance to Poseidon's underwater palace, a place no mortal had ever seen and lived to tell the tale. The artifact glowed faintly in my hands, its light pulsing in time with the waves, as if it were alive. I took a deep breath and stepped into the water. The cold was like a knife, slicing through my robes and biting into my skin. Lycos hesitated for a moment before following, his jaw clenched against the chill. As we waded deeper, the artifact's glow intensified, casting an eerie light on the water around us. The waves seemed to part, creating a path that led straight into the depths. I glanced at Lycos, who nodded grimly, and together we plunged beneath the surface. The water was strangely warm, and the pressure that should have crushed us was absent. The artifact's light enveloped us, forming a bubble of air that allowed us to breathe. Around us, the sea was alive with movement. Schools of fish darted past, their scales shimmering like jewels, and strange, bioluminescent plants swayed in the current. It was beautiful, but there was an undercurrent of danger, a sense that we were being watched. We descended deeper, the light from above fading until only the artifact illuminated our way. The seafloor was a labyrinth of jagged rocks and towering coral formations, their shapes twisted and unnatural. In the distance, I could see the faint outline of a structure, a massive palace carved from black stone, its spires reaching toward the surface like the fingers of a drowned giant. "That's it," I whispered, though the sound was swallowed by the water. Poseidon's palace. As we approached, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and I caught glimpses of creatures that defied description. Things with too many eyes, too many teeth, things that seemed to be made of water itself. Lycos gripped my arm, his face pale, but he said nothing. The palace loomed before us, its gates wide open as if inviting us in. The artifact's light flickered as we crossed the threshold, and the bubble of air around us expanded to fill the cavernous entrance hall. The walls were covered in intricate carvings depicting the history of the sea, the rise of Poseidon, the battles with ancient sea monsters, and the creation of the trident. But there was something else, something the carvings didn't show. In the shadows between the figures, hidden in the cracks and crevices, were symbols like the ones on the tablet. They seemed to tell a different story, one of betrayal and loss. "This place, it's not what I expected," Lycos said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "It feels wrong." I nodded, unable to shake the feeling of unease. The palace was magnificent, but there was a darkness here, a sense of something broken. We followed the carvings deeper into the palace, the artifact guiding us like a compass. The halls were empty, the only sound the faint drip of water and the echo of our footsteps. But as we turned a corner, we found ourselves face to face with a massive door, its surface covered in the same cryptic symbols as the tablet. The artifact's light flared, and the door began to open with a groan that reverberated through the palace. Beyond it was a chamber unlike anything I had ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts, crystals that pulsed with light, scrolls written in languages I couldn't read, and weapons that seemed to hum with power. But at the center of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, was the source of the earthquakes. Poseidon's trident. It was larger than I had imagined, its 3 prongs gleaming like polished silver. But something was wrong. The trident was cracked, its surface marred by deep fissures that glowed with an unnatural light. The air around it shimmered, and I could feel the power radiating from it, a power that was unstable, dangerous. "This is it," I said, my voice trembling. "This is what's causing the earthquakes." Lycos stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. "It's incredible, but it's broken. If we don't fix it, the damage could be catastrophic." Before I could respond, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. "Too late, little mortals." We turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. She was tall and slender, her skin pale as moonlight and her hair a cascade of black tendrils that seemed to writhe like living things. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and her smile was filled with too many teeth. "Echidna," I whispered, the name slipping from my lips like a curse. The mother of monsters laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You've come far, priestess, but you're too late. The trident is mine, and soon the world will tremble beneath my children's feet." She raised a hand, and the ground beneath us shook violently. The shelves toppled, their contents scattering across the floor, and the cracks in the trident widened, its light growing brighter. "We have to stop her," I shouted, but Lycos was already moving. He grabbed a crystal from the floor and hurled it at Echidna. It struck her shoulder, and she hissed in pain, her form flickering like a shadow in the light. "Run!" Lycos yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the door. We fled through the palace, the walls shaking around us as Echidna's laughter echoed in our ears. The artifact's light guided us, but the path was treacherous, the floor cracking and crumbling beneath our feet. As we reached the entrance, I glanced back and saw Echidna standing in the doorway, her form shifting and twisting as if she were made of smoke. "You can't escape," she called, her voice a whisper that carried on the wind. "The trident is mine, and soon the world will be too." We burst through the palace gates and into the open water, the artifact's light flaring as it propelled us toward the surface. The sea churned around us, the waves rising and falling like the breaths of a sleeping giant. When we finally broke the surface, gasping for air, the village was in chaos. The cliffs were collapsing, the ground splitting open as the earthquakes reached their peak. "We have to go back," I said, my voice desperate. "We have to stop her." Lycos shook his head, his face grim. "We can't do this alone." "We need help." "From who?" I asked, my heart sinking. He looked at me, his eyes filled with determination. "From Poseidon." The sea was no longer our ally. Lycos and I stood on the trembling shore, the village behind us in ruins. The cliffs were collapsing, great chunks of rock tumbling into the churning waters below. The air was thick with the screams of the villagers and the deafening roar of the earth splitting apart. The artifact in my hands pulsed with a frantic light, as if it too could feel the world unraveling. "We need to find Poseidon," Lycos said, his voice urgent. "If anyone can stop Echidna, it's him." I nodded, though the thought filled me with dread. Poseidon had been silent for so long. His presence felt only in the crashing waves and the occasional storm. Would he even listen to us? And if he did, what would he demand in return? The artifact's light shifted, its glow intensifying as it pointed toward the horizon. Without a word, Lycos and I waded back into the sea, the water closing over us like a shroud. The artifact's bubble of air enveloped us once more, and we descended into the depths, the light from above fading quickly. The journey was different this time. The sea was restless, the currents pulling us in every direction. The creatures we had seen before, the schools of fish, the bioluminescent plants, were gone, replaced by shadows that moved just out of sight. The water itself seemed darker, heavier, as if it were alive and angry. When we reached the palace, it was no longer the imposing, majestic structure we had seen before. The black stone was cracked and crumbling, the spires leaning precariously. The carvings on the walls were distorted, their once-proud figures twisted into grotesque shapes. The air inside was thick with a strange, oppressive energy, and the sound of distant thunder echoed through the halls. "This place, it's falling apart," Lycos said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Echidna's doing," I replied, my grip tightening on the artifact. "She's using the trident to tear the world apart." We moved quickly, the artifact guiding us through the crumbling palace. The halls were empty, the only sound the drip of water and the occasional rumble of the earth. But as we approached the chamber where we had found the trident, the air grew heavier, and the light from the artifact flickered uncertainly. The door to the chamber was gone, reduced to rubble. Inside, the room was in chaos. The shelves had toppled, their contents scattered across the floor. The pedestal where the trident had rested was shattered, and the trident itself was gone. But Echidna was there. She stood in the center of the room, her form shifting and twisting like smoke. The trident was in her hands, its cracks glowing with an unnatural light. She turned to us, her eyes burning with malice. "You're too late," she said, her voice a low, guttural growl. "The trident is mine, and soon the world will be too." Lycos stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "You don't understand what you're doing. The trident's power is unstable. If you keep using it, you'll destroy everything." Echidna laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Destroy? No, mortal. I will remake the world in my image. A world where my children rule and the gods are nothing but dust." She raised the trident, and the ground beneath us shook violently. The walls of the chamber cracked, water rushing in from all sides. The artifact's light flickered, and I felt the bubble of air around us weaken. "We have to stop her," I said, my voice desperate. "How?" Lycos asked, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't have an answer. But before I could speak, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, like the rumble of the earth itself. Enough, the water around us stilled and the tremors ceased. Echidna turned, her eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Poseidon. He was taller than I had imagined, his form radiating power and authority. His hair was a wild mane of seaweed and foam, and his eyes glowed with the light of the deepest ocean. In his hand he held a trident, identical to the one Echidna had stolen, but whole and unbroken. "Echidna," he said, his voice calm but filled with menace. "You have overstepped." Echidna sneered, her form shifting and twisting. "You're too late, old god. The trident is mine, and soon your power will be too." Poseidon's eyes narrowed, and he raised his trident. The water around us surged, forming a whirlpool that pulled Echidna off her feet. She screamed, her form flickering like a shadow in the light, but she held onto the stolen trident with a grip of iron. "You cannot defeat me," she hissed. "I am the mother of monsters. I am chaos itself." Poseidon's expression darkened, and he stepped forward, his trident glowing with a fierce light. "You are a parasite feeding on the power of others. But no more." He thrust his trident forward, and a beam of light shot out, striking Echidna in the chest. She screamed, her form dissolving into smoke, but the stolen trident remained, its cracks glowing brighter than ever. "The trident," I said, my voice urgent. "It's unstable. If it breaks, the world will be torn apart," Poseidon finished, his voice grim. He turned to me, his eyes piercing. "You have the artifact. Use it." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The artifact in my hands pulsed with a frantic light, and I could feel its power, raw and untamed. But I didn't know how to use it. "Cassandra," Lycos said, his voice calm but urgent. "You can do this. You're the bridge between mortals and gods. You're the only one who can." I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the artifact glowing brighter with each step. I could feel its power, a strange, ancient force that seemed to resonate with the very core of my being. I raised the artifact, and the light from it merged with the glow of the stolen trident. The cracks in the trident began to close, the unstable energy within it calming. Echidna's form flickered, her screams echoing through the chamber as she was pulled into the trident, her essence trapped within its core. The ground beneath us shook one final time, and then everything was still. Poseidon lowered his trident, his expression unreadable. He turned to me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, respect perhaps, or sorrow. "You have done well, mortal," he said, his voice soft but filled with power. "But the trident is still broken. It must be repaired or the world will never be safe." I nodded, my heart heavy. "What must I do?" Poseidon's gaze was steady. "You must become its guardian. But know this, the power of the trident is not meant for mortals. If you take this path, you will be forever changed." I looked at Lycos, who nodded, his eyes filled with determination. Then I turned back to Poseidon. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "Whatever it takes." Poseidon nodded, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. The light was blinding, a searing white that consumed everything. For a moment I felt weightless, as if I were floating in a void where time and space had no meaning. Then, slowly, the light faded, and I found myself standing in a place that was neither land nor sea, but something in between. The ground beneath my feet was smooth and glassy, reflecting the endless sky above. The air was thick with the scent of salt and ozone, and the horizon stretched in every direction, a perfect circle of blue and gold. In the center of this strange world stood Poseidon, his trident in hand, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart race. "Cassandra," he said, his voice echoing like the crash of waves against the shore. "You have chosen a path few mortals would dare to walk. The trident's power is immense, but it comes at a cost. Are you prepared to bear it?" I looked down at the artifact in my hands, its light now steady and calm. I could feel its power, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through my very soul. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing on the edge of a cliff with the wind at your back. "I am," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that coiled in my chest. "If it means saving the world, I'll do whatever it takes." Poseidon nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then let it be so." He raised his trident, and the ground beneath us trembled. The artifact in my hands began to glow brighter, its light merging with the trident's until the two were indistinguishable. I felt a surge of energy, a rush of power that filled me to the brim and then overflowed. It was like being struck by lightning, every nerve in my body alight with a fire that burned but did not consume. When the light faded, I was no longer the same. I could feel the trident's power coursing through me, a steady, pulsing rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. My skin shimmered faintly, as if I were made of water and light, and my hair floated around me like seaweed in the current. I felt stronger, more alive than I ever had before, but there was a weight to it, a sense of responsibility that pressed down on me like the depths of the ocean. "You are now the guardian of the trident," Poseidon said, his voice solemn. "Its power is yours to wield, but you must use it wisely. The balance of the world depends on you." I nodded, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders like a mantle. "I understand." Poseidon's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked almost human. "You have done well, Cassandra. But your journey is not over. The world is still fragile, and there are those who would seek to upset its balance. You must remain vigilant." Before I could respond, the world around us began to dissolve, the glassy ground and endless sky fading into darkness. I felt a sudden pull, as if I were being drawn back into the world of mortals, and then I was standing on the shore once more, the artifact, now the trident, in my hands. Lycos was there, his face pale but filled with relief. "Cassandra," he said, his voice trembling. "You're different." I looked down at myself, at the faint shimmer of my skin and the trident in my hands. "I am," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm still me." The village was in ruins, the cliffs still crumbling and the sea churning violently. But as I raised the trident, I could feel its power, steady and sure. I closed my eyes and focused, letting the trident's energy flow through me and into the earth. The tremors ceased, the ground growing still beneath my feet. The sea calmed, its waves smoothing into gentle ripples. The villagers, who had been huddled in fear, began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces filled with awe and wonder. "It's over," Lycos said, his voice filled with relief. "You did it." I shook my head. "Not over. The trident's power is stable for now, but it will need to be guarded. And there are still threats out there, forces that would seek to upset the balance." Lycos nodded, his expression serious. "Then we'll face them together." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the trident's power. "Together,"